Hello, I'm Ben Clover. I'm the hospitals reporter and I cover London, and I'm going to be talking about efficiency. Efficiency, ever since there's been NHS trusts, they have been encouraged to be more efficient. But broadly, it hasn't mattered if you hadn't been, right? So as long as it's referred to, people get set large SIP targets, which are cost improvement programs, often as high as 10%. And if they didn't hit them, well, as long as you were still in balance at the end, that was okay. That world has gone now, as virtually everyone is in deficit. So efficiency is now increasingly important. So it's been a big year for efficiency already. We've had the Carter Review this time last year, and if I was giving this talk this time last year, I'd be describing the heady ferment of excitement behind the efficiency agenda as the Carter Review came out, and it had all these recommendations for all different areas. A year has passed now, and there's been progress on some things and less progress on some other things. I'm going to take you through some of that, what I think the implications are, and where we'll be in a year's time. So, Lord Carter's review covered lots of areas. And it was updated in the Next Steps document that came out a couple of weeks ago, which boiled those down to 10 points, 9 of which I think are probably directly relevant here. I'm going to have to be efficient myself in streamlining those down. So I'm not going to talk about pharmacy, I'm not going to talk about billing foreign patients or public health, but I am going to address the NHS buying stuff. So NHS trusts and bodies procuring things, NHS trusts and bodies doing things with back office. I'll explore the strange acronym GIRFT, and also get onto estates. Okay, so first off, why is all this important? Well, it's big money. So the Carter plan committed the service to shaving £5 billion off its spend by 2021, which is a big ask, right? And just to give you a sense of how that breaks down, the NHS in 15-16 spent 3.7 billion on agency staff. They brought that down to 3 billion last year, which is an achievement. But that 3.7 billion is a considerable increase in quite a small time. So the increase alone from 2 years prior to that is the size of the take the Exchequer gets from inheritance tax. So these are increasingly on the government's radar as big areas of spend. Okay, so what does that mean, again, for NHS organisations and the people who supply them? Well, increasingly, at a trust level, if I want to rebuild some unit of mine and I need capital funding to do it, the centre is going to ask to see my plan for disposing of some estate. So the Naylor Review, which is all about property, now the NHS uses its property, how it can make better use of it, what bits of it could sell or work with a partner to increase the yield from. He's asked for a 2-for-1 Treasury pounds. So for every pound you make from selling or using your estate differently, the Treasury should give you 2. I mean, that's not a given yet, but there's strong grounds to think that will happen soon. Another reason this is important, the efficiency agenda, is increasingly people are going to get offsteaded on this. So until the announcement of the election, we were due in early May to have a league table for efficiency, for how trusts spend their money. Largely trusts, of course also commissioners, but largely trusts as the big drivers of spend, right? So previously every 3 years, a minister would stand up and often hold a toilet roll above their head and say, this cost £4 in Manchester and 80p in Bedford, and it must end, right? So increasingly we're going to actually see a metric which people can be judged on more regularly and more harshly. So that's in the post for trusts. Anyway, so I'll come on to a couple of things. So outsourcing. Carter said everyone needs to benchmark their spend on back office. So that's things like HR, kind of the payroll functions, IT. He said you shouldn't be spending more than 7% of your income on back office, and everyone had to benchmark it, come up with a plan to consolidate if they were above. Now, obviously, it's hard to get data together for that, and the data, as we're going to see with quite a lot of the Carter programme, wasn't wholly reliable. Okay, so the Carter team found 13 trusts out of a total 230 with a spend above 7%. So we shouldn't expect too much action on back office because the metrics aren't wholly reliable and there's not a lot of pump priming for it so far. Where we might expect more action is on the estates. I watched Sir Robert Naylor, the author of the report, the Naylor report on how the NHS uses its property, speak this morning, and he identified 5 opportunities in London alone where there was potential for bringing more than £1 billion into the service from a strategic estates partnership. Now, what is a strategic estates partnership? It's not just the NHS selling off some of its land. That's how it might have done things 20 years ago, but the understanding is now out there in the service that the money is better served if you partner with someone who knows what they're doing on property, and then they can take you through getting the change of use permission, and you become, in effect, a developer. So we expect quite a lot of action on strategic estates partnerships. There already is some in North London, South East London. Procurement, I think. Procurement and GIRFT are going to be 2 of the biggest success stories of the Carter programme. So when I say procurement, I don't mean NHS commissioners procuring clinical services. Again, I mean trusts and other NHS bodies buying stuff, buying consumable goods, buying gloves, stents, soft FM, that kind of thing. Okay? Now, what's changed this and what will continue to change the agenda on procurement, and procurement is an arcane world at the moment. What will change that is the data is there. For the first time, the PPIB programme brings together what the NHS spends on individual consumable items from across the whole of the service. So at a stroke, you can see a supplier's regional pricing strategy. Now, this has already started to have an effect, and it's for that reason, the bringing together of that data, that we might actually see the Carter target, 350 million in procurement savings, achieved this year. Agency spending is what my bottom bullet point is on. Agency spend, like I said earlier, was 3.7 billion in 15-16, which is just a huge sum. And getting it down to 3 billion this year, the year just gone, is a considerable achievement. But NHS Improvement want more on that. Roughly, that breaks down to 2 billion of agency nurses, 1 billion of agency doctors. Okay. Now, I think they've probably taken all they can, or most of what they can take, out of the nurses. So the explicitly set out goal in the next steps document was to take 15% out of the medical locums. That's 150 million. That's the equivalent to the spend on A&E doctors altogether. They will travel, is the problem, in the way that large nursing workforces on agency won't. So the odds of them making that are, I think, narrower. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, procurement, let me go into a bit more detail on procurement. At the moment, to give you an idea, of sort of what procurement is, procurement within trusts for NHS suppliers is it's big and it is unglamorous. It's a large amount of money, and it's often hard to get staff to fill those posts. So, for example, heads of procurement, directors of procurement at London organisations, roughly 1/3 of those posts are unfilled at the moment. But the increase in the information technology should mean smaller departments can do more, and the opportunities for differential pricing will reduce. Another thing that's going to happen on procurement this year is towers. So we're going to see less of the regional procurement collectives. They look like their power might decline slightly because towers are coming. Now, towers are another example of the centralisation of things away from trust. Towers are a DH procured scheme to spend. They're going to spend roughly 150 million just paying for the people to do the procurement on behalf of trusts. And this is going to cover lots of consumables, like quite large areas of spend for trusts. They're going to move away from the local level up to the centre. They'll get appointed round about May. We'll should start to hear some inklings, rather, of who they might be in May. And they will be worth knowing if you're selling any kind of consumable to the NHS, in the same way the procurement partnerships at a regional level were before. GIRFT, I'm going to touch on briefly. GIRFT is the Getting It Right First Time programme, right? GIRFT, you can tell its importance to the government by how much money is being spent on this. It's roughly a £60 million programme, right? And this was, it's grown out of some work led by Professor Tim Briggs at the Royal National Orthopaedic Hospital. He's an orthopaedic surgeon, right? One of the most eminent in his field in the country, probably the world. And what he has done is he has gone around every unit doing orthopaedic surgery in the country, that's hundreds of units, and gone in detail through their clinical results, and then just asked very tough questions of their medics. Why do you have so many more surgical site infections than the trust down the road? Because there is, like everywhere in the NHS, there is a lot of variation there. So Tim Briggs and his team have been doing that with orthopaedics. They've expanded the team to cover another 20 specialties. There could be more on the way. And these will start to have a real effect quite soon for NHS trusts, as they are told, you are too small. You don't do enough work. In lots of cases, you need to centralise this work somewhere where it can be done at scale and more efficiently. And it will also have a procurement angle, because his team also say, all right, what do you spend per hip implant? Why is there a tenfold variation between here and there? So it's another trend from procurement, this time driven very hard but from a clinical angle, and those teams will start to make a real difference in the lives of trusts quite soon. Yeah, back office outsourcing I've sort of covered already. That's being trialled across 4 STP areas. There's no real pump priming for it. My sources indicate you shouldn't be too optimistic about seeing large-scale change there. We will start to see more tension between STPs and trusts when these crunchy issues around things like procurement, around things like centralising services actually start to bite. And as with all things in the NHS, there's quite a lot of variation between how effective STPs are. So, key messages. When I say Carter is largely dead, I mean the programme, not the man. Like, he's fine. What I mean by this is there doesn't appear to be a very strong central push on lots of metrics in Carter. Like the next steps was a synthesis of what NHS England considers really important on that. But even on some of those work streams, there's not a huge push. But like I've said, do expect to see more on procurement. Do expect to see results on Carter. Like, if you're dealing with trust at all, it's worth looking up what specialties, what specialty work streams are where, and who will be having a huge effect, or who will be controlling the approved list of suppliers for certain procedures. Like, that's in the post. Yeah. The model hospital, that is essentially a dashboard for all of the different metrics that the centre was going to try and measure trusts on. Some of those measures are more reputable than others. Some of them are improving, some of them not so much. But it's worth familiarising yourself with that, because there's going to be still a push to put pressure on trust chief executives to really embed those in their day-to-day thinking, to really make trust chief executives think, well, this is something I'm going to be judged on by the centre. Yeah, I've covered towers, and so people worth knowing across the different fields. On procurement, NHS Improvement will be appointing 4 regional procurement leads in the autumn. They're going to enjoy significant power. The people appointed to run the towers on procurement will be very important also. We've already seen some quite unusual organisations looking to run towers, like Oxford Academic Health Science Network, which was a surprise. We don't know who's running them yet, but there could be scope for upset there. On estates, it's really going to be about the people in the STPs and the people in the stronger STPs. Yeah, back office I've talked about, and on GERFT it'll be those individual specialty teams. So in spite of what I've said about there not being too much central drive anymore on Carter, like the bad news is our estimate is probably that it'll probably only achieve about 1/5 of what it intended to. The good news is that's still about £1 billion. So on that hopefully happy note, I'm going to introduce you to my colleague David Williams, who's going to talk about Brexit.